This is Life Worlds, the place where we explore life through other eyes and minds. Let's flip the script and discover how to orient your world around nature. I'm Alexa Firminish. Come join me as we get down and forage for fungi, stalk coyotes, draft laws for rivers, hum with beehives, sing bird language, and help beavers to dam again. Let these stories spark your reconnection to nature's multiverse. Learn how to bring ecosystems back to life, become an agent for other intelligences, and begin to see how you too are the sum of all life worlds. Hey folks, welcome to Life Worlds. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to breathe yourself into your own body, to flow with the outbreath of trees into your own fractaling lungs, and to journey deep into the breathing of your cells? Or maybe once, just for a brief instant, you longed to transmute, to transform your human flesh into the branching veins and bark and fluttering leaves of an ancient tree. And maybe like me, you've wondered what it would be like to see the world as an insect with so many different frequencies of light and speed, or how it would feel like to gallop across a forest floor with the padded paws of a feline's, or maybe to stitch an ecosystem together with your legs as mycelium highways sparkling with energy underfoot. I sincerely do hope that your mind has had these thoughts at some point in time, because how fun is it just to imagine all of that? Today, we will be exploring how these imaginations are being brought to life with new technologies. The tools we'll be exploring are beginning to enable us to step into the umwelt, the life worlds, of other species in really quite rather extraordinary ways. We'll be speaking with Han Ursin, one of the founders of the London-based artist collective Marshmallow Laser Feast. They've emerged as one of the leading virtual reality creators in recent years, using dazzlingly aesthetic real-time virtual reality experiences to explore perspectives that are commonly inaccessible to the human senses. Marshmallow Laser Feast has exhibited internationally, from London to New York, Melbourne to Seoul, and their works have been included in major exhibitions in institutions whose names you might recognize, such as the Barbican Centre, the Sundance Film Festival, South by Southwest, and many, many more. I have actually been tracking their work since about 2016, when I first became interested in the mind-altering capabilities of virtual reality in general, and heard about their piece called Eyes of the Forest, a project that puts you in the eyes of 4 different animals and insects in Grisdale Forest along the food chain. I then began following them on social media, observing from a distance as the elegance and intricacy of their pieces only grew in scope and reach. And finally, I got to meet Ursin just last month in their East London studio, beside hipster food markets and jazzy dive bars with graffiti on the doors. It was time for me to see this all for myself, and whether the lived experience would stack up to what I was seeing in images. Obviously, I so wanted this to be true. And after a decade of patience, I can now confirm that this waiting was not in vain. With the headset strapped around my face, and their breath registering device, it's obviously not the right technical term, hovering in front of my mouth, catching every breath, I entered into their world. And I was stunned, quite literally speechless. What I witnessed was so disarming and exceptional that the tears that came to my eyes felt like the only dignified response my body could offer. These artists had found a way to convey the depth and complexity and indescribable wonder of nature in sensory ways I could never have imagined experiencing with my human sensory apparatus alone. Now, as a disclaimer, I have taken psychedelics and I have seen some bizarre phenomena in my life, but never have I seen in an unaltered state with my 2 eyes, with my own body interpreting it as happening in real time, a tree absorbing the breath molecules I could see coming out of my mouth, my fingertips in real time glowing with the hemoglobin inside of them, the ground below my feet turning translucent to display the highway of pulsing mycelium underfoot. And then my entire body beginning to float and to rise up like oxygen in the trunk of an ancient sequoia tree. Surrounded by ribbons of this tree's vasculature, I realized then for the first time the transformational power of where virtual reality is headed and what it can do. And how, as Ursin describes, it can convey the invisible vibrancy of life that flows through all beings. At last count, in 2023, 171 million people use virtual reality technology globally. This demand mostly comes from industries in what's termed the creative economy, so things like gaming, entertainment, retail, and live events. And VR companies are also finding broad applications in industries like healthcare and education, real estate, and maybe a little bit more darkly, the military. Of course, its use in the metaverse is quite well known and has triggered a flurry of discourse around the perils and pitfalls of how we can lose ourselves in virtual worlds. Just like most technologies, it harbors incredible potential and challenges. And so for the application I'm discussing today, I invite you to consider the artistic and educational role of virtual reality. There are applications I find wonderful that are occurring around the world. For example, schools now have students going on virtual field trips to places they would never be able to see firsthand, like archaeological sites. Virtual reality is used to train rangers and conservationists in anti-poaching techniques and wildlife monitoring. And it's been used a lot of times in the climate space to immerse audiences in different issues, mimicking things like simulations of sea rise. Or even contemplate one of Marshmallow Laser Feast pieces called Forest Bathing Lupuna that compresses 24 hours of the rainforest into a 5-minute long piece that interrogates the experience of time and space beyond the limitations of our perception. Many people in the VR for good industry say that VR works best when it plays with perspective. Shape-shifting can be a very effective way to help people better understand complex issues, right? Because hard facts are not enough to make us really feel something. And so virtual reality helps us make things more tangible. One of Marshmallow Laser Feast's most recent exhibitions is called The Works of Nature, and it showed at Acme in Australia. And this was a series of their digital artworks on a grand scale. And they went beyond the virtual reality to include guided meditations, large-scale screen works, and interactive experiences where thousands of visitors could evolve from droplets of water into plants, cells, and stars, becoming a part of the cycle of life in the cosmos. And of course, MLF pushed the bounds of what technology makes possible. Haptic vests that try and pull your body on cue, multimodal sensors that trigger scents and gusts of wind and water droplets that further fool your body into seeing and feeling that it really is existing in those parallel realms. And so, in my conversation with Ursin today, I get so curious about this sacred act of translation that they're engaged in. Who is it that they need to speak to in order to enter the world of other animals? What is it that virtual reality can create that no other medium can? What are some of the astounding ways other beings experience the world? And how could education be redesigned based upon tools like these? Ursin told me when we were together that entering into the perception of other species was the most rewarding experience of his life. And I can see why. I am not the only person who took off that headset moved to tears. And I sincerely wonder what the transformational role of this kind of perception shift could have if deployed widely across schools, universities, climate summits around the world. I mean, imagine what it could do for our ecological sensitivities, proclivities, alliances, ethics. And so, without further ado, let's hand over to my conversation with Ursin Han Ursin from Marshmallow Laser Feast. Without further ado, let's kick off, dear Ursin Han Ursin. Such a cool name, and your background is psychedelic in all of the best of ways. It's such a pleasure to see you again. In the intro to the show, I'll have spoken a little bit about the visit that we had in your London studio, which was profoundly moving. So first of all, welcome to Life Worlds.
Thank you. It's really great to be here. Nice talking to you.
So nice speaking with you again. I thought to kick us off, we would travel through some of your pieces, starting with some of the first pieces. And before doing that, I want to ask you this question of like, what is it for you that has been rewarding across all of these years of translating these experiences of more than human life, entering into the perception of these other species? Like, what has been satisfying? How has it changed you? Do you feel different in your body? Just starting from like your personal felt experience, having now, traveled through veins and mosquitoes and trees and fungi. Is Urson a different man?
Definitely, and it's the change continues. I just want to start with an anecdote where every single one of these experiences, in the eyes of the animal, was 2015 when we first embarked on that journey of kind of exploring more than human world through kind of disembodying your own body and embodying another being. And it was an incredible learning process. Probably learned more within 6 to 8 months of that research phase of that particular project than my entire education life in terms of biology. Um, and to try to kind of keep on top of the kind of literacy exploration and all the new research that's coming out ever since. But a few years ago, I've attended a retreat called Soulful Connection with Trees in Dartington. And that was, a bunch of tree geeks in all ages, all backgrounds, and just ended up there. And for 3 days, just talking about trees. Obviously, I'm very, very passionate about trees. I think deeply about trees and the notion of what is it like to be a tree. And I've got some ideas and reading loads and trying to figure it out. But what I found in that particular time over the course of 3 days, where first day you are blindfolded, your partner takes you to a tree, you touch, you taste, you smell, you listen, and try to understand what species is this. And you know, uh, 2 out of 3, you just guess it. You get what it is, and it's this wow moment. And then the following day, you dig a hole, you bury yourself to your knees, and then you meditate for 45 minutes to an hour, starting from a seed all the way to a fully grown tree, and then falling onto the forest floor and decomposing. So you just kind of try to expand your sense of self again. And on the third day, you are again taken to another tree or series of trees, blindfolded. This time you're not allowed to touch, and you just listen your gut, what it's saying. Obviously, you've got this, sensory perception of creating reality through so many inputs, and we don't have just this Aristotelian 5 senses. We've got far more in order to kind of understand and hallucinate about reality. And again, it's just you get it all. You immediately guess what tree that you are in the vicinity of without even touching, by simply listening, smelling, and feeling. So that notion, I think, this intellectual taxonomic understanding of species has been a wonderful journey for me to learn through these projects and understand. And I was we were all very fortunate and lucky enough to work with scientists and their groundbreaking work and listen them in the first account, and this incredible journey. But it wasn't until then the experience of deeply listening a tree, being in the vicinity of a tree, and being able to understand the nuances and the differences, and realization of that I, with my human senses, can tune into that world, was probably the most moving, interesting, and profound experience I had. And because of the work we do, but also in our in my spare time, I spend a fair bit of time in nature, and even the process of kind of creating these experiences require us to be there, observe, record, scan these environments. So you spend deliberate time in these places, but it wasn't until that moment. So I've got, I think there is this, intellectual growth and, deepening your understanding, and the research part that is continuing, and it has been changing me ever since. But there was this one, profound experiential moment or series of them in that particular retreat that I think changed my outlook of at least begin to understand what is it like to be a tree. Not that I can understand, not that I can ever understand, but it was really profound. So, I think now I am um, trying to obviously understand all the scientific inquiry and the intellectual understanding of different species as we engage with them through different projects. But now I'm trying to spend a different time, a listening time with these species in a very intentional way to capture that change. So yes, lots of change there.
And I can imagine that leads to two things. The first is a desire to bring into your art pieces, your artworks, your designs, that same experiential embodied experience that you had in Dartington. It's like, okay, how can I have the viewer, the participant of this space that I create have something akin to what I had when I was out there in that forest? I'm sure that influences how you think. And also it probably influences the way that you like the way that the pieces must feel. So I'm very curious about the evolution of the pieces throughout time as well. I also love something you said, activating more senses to hallucinate about reality. That's exquisite. Yes, and my experience of the pieces when we were together, it was definitely activating senses that were beyond those five senses. There was a lot happening inside of me, and it's very hard to describe. If we go to what was kind of that first kickoff for you guys in the ecological realm, let's say, very explicitly, at least in the eyes of the animals. As per the story, if I remember correctly, as you told it to me, a festival approached you and it was going to be in the forest. And so you're like, okay, how can we create something there? And you and your team went and your colleagues went to the forest and were amazed by everything you saw, like the moss and all these creatures in this sort of like last temperate part of the rainforest in the UK. You said to me it was like one of the last little climate jewels that was tucked away. And then you went to design an experience that was based on that with the humble curiosity of like, oh my gosh, we don't know much at all. So for people who haven't come across your work, just very fundamentally, basically, can you describe what the piece is and this sort of narrative that was created through it? Because then that'll help to cue up some of the later discussions, just to bring people into what it is you actually researched and what you saw, and then how you conveyed this forest to others.
In the eyes of the animals, almost became the marker of the journey that took place afterwards, and it's a very, very special project. What you're seeing in the background is part of In the Eyes of the Animal. It's a mosquito vision. So as you mentioned, we were invited by Abandon Normal Devices Festival, which takes place every other year in a strange place, sometimes in a cave, sometimes in a forest, and that year it was in a forest. And we were invited to go and see, and realizing the vibrancy of life, strangeness of multi-species interaction, just like completely covered in moss. And it's you often see things like that in tropics, whereas these temperate rainforests, and so few of it, so such small parts of it remain in the UK. That was quite interesting, but also there is this realization of we know nothing about nature. Like, why this is growing on top of that? What is this tree? How are they moving? What is the kind of interspecies symbiotic relationship between these things? Just no idea. And that was quite fascinating to come to that realization. And the other part was totally mesmerized by the kind of diversity and the vibrancy of life. That even though you don't know, but you can tell, it's a bit like you don't have to listen to any classical music, but if something is played and some notes are wrong, You can tell. You don't need to know the song. You know something is not right. And this is like, you know something is right here. What is that thing that is right? And that led to the question of, if I'm feeling this way, what other species feel about this place? Like, how do they perceive the world around them? Is it as special to them as it is to us? And that led to the whole idea of Umwelt, this notion coined by the pioneering biologist Jacob van Uxkal to describe unique sensory world of a species, dictated or influenced by their sensory organs. So the perception of reality vastly varies depending on who you're asking to in terms of the species. I mean, it obviously differs even between humans. Certain colors are perceived in certain parts of the world much better than the others. Your surroundings shape within few generations how you kind of tune to your environment, and therefore it flavors your reality. But when you change your sensory perception to become something completely different, like a mosquito, it, it's a huge shift. And that was the beginning of this train of thought. And we wanted to explore the same patch of forest through the sensory perception of four different species. It was five, and then we ran out of money, but we ended up with four species. And that was following a food chain from the one of the smallest units, the midges, and they are so annoying in the UK. It's just these tiny mosquitoes, and they grow well. So you start as a mosquito. Mosquitoes see CO2 in the forests, and that's how they find their kind of hot-blooded victims, and that's how they trace and tune their senses. But just just having this kind of leap in imagination, thinking, okay, what if you're a mosquito and flying through a forest when it's actually reversing its photosynthesis in the nighttime? So it's just producing carbon dioxide, this high density of carbon dioxide flowing through. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. So we scan these forests using LiDAR scanner, which I can kind of elaborate further. It's a kind of a scanner that captures 3D volumetric information, and took that information. It's relatively realistic, sub-millimeter accurate, and with it comes with the color. But we wanted to kind of shift the dial in tuning of these data sets to match a speculative take on the sensory perception of how these species are actually perceiving the forest. So, if you were to see the carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere, what would it look like? How are the color perceptions functioning? And, the journey you started as a mosquito, you get eaten by a dragonfly and you become a dragonfly. Dragonfly sees 300 frames, almost 300 frames per second. It's like somewhere between 240 and 300 frames per second. They see full spectrum of light. Imagine being able to see infrared, ultraviolet, and they see in 360. And they are some of the most accomplished flyers ever existed. Their wingspan was almost 2 meters, not, just a few million years ago. And so it's just huge, beautiful being that can fly in any direction while stabilizing its head and pivoting around it. So it's just the magical world unfurls. So you become a dragonfly, and the world you see shifts in color and behavior and movement. It feels a bit like underwater. Things are moving slowly, because if you were to see more frame rate, it's a bit like watching these, iPhone slow motion films back. Just things are moving really slowly if you translate that to human. And then you are wearing a vest that vibrates, just trying to give you the impression of having wings. What would it feel like to have wings at moments? And obviously, most of those are, still a fair bit of anthropomorphizing. We are trying to translate some of those sensory perceptions, but also allowing visitors to bridge the gap and place their imagination in between. So it's not, let's say, it's well rounded and with holes. So enough imagination holes. And then you get eaten by a frog. So you become a frog, and frog sees the world in a very limited way, but they've got this fascinating, intelligent eyes. This notion of body is a vessel, all our consciousness and mind, happens somewhere up here around the brain. It challenges notion, and that the whole Cartesian theater idea for like centuries we thought that's the case, and finally a species prove us wrong around the 1940s that they have these smart eyes, they have distributed intelligence. Their eyes do some of the choosing, what to see, what not to see. So when things moving horizontal axis, worms, they see immediately. When things are moving in vertical axis, they don't see. And these are, we found these beautiful studies and working with scientists in Natural History Museum, trying to understand their cognitive processes and their pointers, and just this magical world is constantly opening up. But they also, some of them, Tungara frogs, for instance, can ribbit on a water surface, send this wave out and listen the incoming wave, the echo. It's almost like echolocation to pinpoint peers within that kind of dark, seemingly invisible place. Obviously, they know it really well. And then that gets eaten by an owl. Owls are, just extremely accomplished flyers. They fly completely silently. So, you as a frog sitting there in your pond, thinking that the cacophony that you're creating with the sound shield is going to protect you. But no. The owl has these conical eyeballs, so their peripheral vision is relatively blurry. But this is our assumption, by the way. Maybe their brain is correcting that. We are looking at the physiology of the eyeball and making an assumption. I mean, not us, but scientists. And central vision is super sharp. Therefore, they can read newspaper from 100 meters. Like that kind of, the 9-8 point font can be read from 100-meter distance. Binocular vision. So you are basically going through the food chain and changing the way we are visualizing this data world, the forests, in different ways by manipulating that data based on some of these assumptions. And you're experiencing the same forest that you just saw with your human perception through the perception of these species. And it was relatively psychedelic, very minimal sound, but the impact and the feedback was so overwhelming. And that was, I think we were like, oh, I think we found something here. That there is something that resonates with people of all ages, because there's a very broad audience to end festival. It's all ages in these strange places we can't really put a finger on, but there is something that feels right in terms of the joy of learning in the process of making, but then the joy of sharing and that emotional connection and expanding your empathy to include something that annoys you, like a mosquito. There's something here, and that kind of set the tone for us, where we apply the same template, trying to build experiences in that emotional space where you can induce or evoke certain sensations to to create that feeling of expansion of self into other beings. And also, very selfishly, it's the most amazing learning experience. So just love it, and it became the template.
I'm sure that people who are listening can feel this as well. It's like so striking to me, the depth of your like fascination and care and like childlike wonder as you describe, like, what it's like to be this just a few million years ago, this dragonfly, or the ribbits or this owl. And I think that it's that one thing is the scientific statistic. The other thing is the awe and the fascination it evokes about like all of the ways that the earth has created all of these adaptations of life in something that's just, an eye. Like how many eyes can actually exist on the planet? And that I think is what we need en masse, at scale, to have many people just realize like, gosh, all of these beings around us in their life worlds, in their umvelts, are incredibly fascinating and unique. And so this act of translation that you're doing and bring this art, this expression to so many people, I think is one of the most important things that can be happening today. And, speaking about acts of translation, you're a team, you go out there into the forests. We'll speak about the other places in a second. You deploy these crazy technologies that I think is also quite interesting to speak about. But then you also have to work with other translators, right? Like you are one version of translator, and the technology you're bringing is translating. But you mentioned working with scientists and working with others. And so maybe you can bring us a little bit into your creative process. Maybe it can be with one of the other pieces, whether it was, living in the ocean of air like Evolver or TreeHugger. But what's the creative process like from the sort of inception to like, okay, well, if we want to translate the life world of this squirrel or of this mosquito, we need to talk to these guys. And our scientists like, okay, are you like, who are you guys? Like, and while you're asking me to like convey what it's like to be a tree. But yeah, I'm curious who else out there helps you translate, and then how you bring that into the pieces.
I think I can kind of expand on this through the example of one of the projects we've realized 2020, I think, 2021. Sorry, yeah, 2021. Called Observations on Being. That was part of the City of Culture Coventry. It was commissioned by them, took place in London Road Cemetery. It's a cemetery park with a few different chapels inside. And we want to tell the story of evolution of life on Earth through cellular respiration and photosynthesis, this magical dark period, and then this cyanobacteria. It's a symbiotic merger, symbiotic existence of different organisms coming together to form cyanobacteria, and one of them deciding to do photosynthesis. We don't know exactly why, how it led to that point. There are theories, obviously. And so we knew that we wanted to explore these relatively like seemingly simple yet almost deep time kind of thinking required to fully comprehend the sequential kind of development of the life we know of it. But then there are so many different angles you can approach the same theme. And that's where we cast our nets very wide and try to speak to as many scientists as we can. And for this particular piece, we've interviewed Stefan Harding. So he's obviously very much in the kind of Gaia theory, but also deep time understanding, and his thinking, his publications, what he's kind of advocating is this looking at the earth as intermingling relationships that are going on not just now, but it is a co-evolutionary process. So nothing exists by itself. It's always in relation to something else, and they evolve at the same time, so they are never static. So interviewing him to understand this sequential, like really interesting hotspots in the history of life, and trying to untangle and demystify those moments. And we then got to work with Marilyn Sheldrake, obviously looking at the same interconnected life under the soil, and just sitting there in a cemetery park under a tree next to a bunch of tombstones, imagining death, not as an end, but as a beginning to become a different life form. We work with Katie Fields, who's another incredible scientist, just telling us the the kind of the evolutionary properties of the microbial life and the mycelium life, but also the photosynthesis. And then the process of that was interesting because we took all these transcriptions, highlighted certain parts that are kind of in line with the story beats that came out of that process, and then gave it to Daisy Lafarge, a magnificent poet, to turn into a voice that guides you through these functions and guides you through this first cyanobacteria's that first moment of photosynthesis. It takes 8 minutes for a single photon of light to reach on Earth, and in the meantime, a cyanobacteria goes, "I'm going to do photosynthesis," and you have oxygen in the atmosphere, and then you've got this, can be an explosion and these life thriving, and they are now too much oxygen and then going down again, and then around the animals or the cellular life moving onto the land and eventually teaming up with fungi to create the soil that we have today. And just witnessing these moments in an accessible, poetic way, in a world where death and life all intermingled from a cultural point of view, like a cemetery park, and you go from one space to another. You sit under a tree, listen the evolution of life for trees. 250, 300 million years ago, how some of the trees that we know today start kind of manifesting in their form, and then you move from there to follow the oxygen coming out of that tree into a human body inside of the chapel, where we've got the video pieces. So this audiovisual piece just kind of manifested in multi-chapter processional experience, taking you from 2.8 billion years ago to today. And the last piece we had was 1,000-year composition that is the one that is continuing to play for the 1,000 years. So everything you now know needs to translate to a thinking that is not just for you, for your offspring, but for generations to come. So how do you relate to the existing world, but also the world that will exist in far into the future that you can't even fathom? So it's some of those concepts are relatively strange, even though well known. It's really helpful to have this notion of grounding the ideas in truth, working with scientists and distilling some of those ideas into a format that is like not mystic. It's just an accessible language, and it's poetry also. Like seriously, last time when I saw you, I was just explaining this. Cellular respiration and photosynthesis are the mirror of each other. When you look at the formula, what goes in, what comes out, it's literally the opposite. And you can take these two cellular activities, put it apart, put Earth in the middle. That's why we have the life in the way that we know today. That's why we are alive, the most simplest way. And these two miraculous cellular actions that we owe everything is just so poetic. So how do you translate that into something experiential, something poetic? And obviously, it's a no-brainer to work with a great poet to do that. So, the notion of collaboration is in the essence of everything we do. We are a collaborative bunch. The reason we came together to form an artist collective is first and foremost to put our heads together, our tears and blood together, to build some of those experiences. And we expand and exercise this in every project we do.
I mean, you said it really well. It really is poetry, what you're creating. You kind of like carry us through these multi-chapters of experiences, like you just described one, and what I experienced in your studio with a TreeHugger was the one with the old ceibas, right? Yeah. Was it TreeHugger? Mm-hmm.
It was a sequoia.
A sequoia, thank you. It's like, I arrive and it's my breath, and let me think of how to explain and ask the question at the same time. It's like you you dangle this little device that probably has a very technical name, obviously, in front of me, and that was capturing my oxygen and my breath. And every time I breathed, I could literally see with the devices my little particles of air, right, like dissipating into the space. And then I saw them going into this incredible sort of like Avatar-y Miyazaki like forest around me. Um, and like Princess Mononoke, if you've seen that, is one of my favorite films of all time. I felt very like I was there. And then, but then you carried me through a story, right? Like there was like sound and voice carrying me through. There was music, and all of a sudden the ground became transparent. And then you called my attention down to the mycelial webs below and all of that light. And then I started levitating and moving upwards and like going up this tree. And then I'm in the branches and I'm almost like part of the tree in the branches. And so, you know, I've done virtual reality experiences before, but it's sort of static and I'm moving around. What I've sensed by what you guys have created is a real poetic story where I'm sort of pulled along into it as a participant, but also like it's like out of my control, like I'm being swept up by the forest in its own process, which is really humbling. And so I'm curious, you know, how you guys think through that, because I know you also bring in and will do increasingly scent, haptics, like wind. And so I can imagine you're trying to like bring in, okay, here's the science, here's the poetry, here's what they're going to see, here's what they're going to feel, this is how their breath is going to interact. Um, Maybe you can speak a little bit about those, like that multimodal story that you build, and how you think about constructing that for the people who experience it, because I'm sure you've also had many learnings along the way.
I'll go in reverse order. Actually, the multimodal approach to storytelling is something that we learned in that journey. You know, it was quite interesting to being able to abandon what you know how to build this story to start catering for multisensoriality, because you know, when you design a filmic installation or an animation or an installation that is just video, you often have the sound and the visuals, they match. You can build a storyboard, you know, go with the time sync, and that's perfect. It works every time, you know. But when it comes to sensoriality, our senses have different response times, and scent, for instance, perceived as a window, it's never a beat. So you rarely, like, even two people in the same room deploying the same scent can perceive scent differently, because the key and lock mechanism in their receptors would favor different particle sizes, so the notes of the felt smell could change. So there's so much experimentation, but also understanding the storytelling. What is the building block of a multisensory story, which we came down to, maybe it's an emotional arc rather than putting a verbal definition of what this is. Can we start from a place where, like, what are the feelings we wanna accomplish by certain moments? And that was quite interesting, because I can now reverse engineer my experience of being in front of a sequoia for hours. This, you know, your self-importance moves away from you and you feel small, you feel humble, but at the same time there is this life force in front of you that you are part of. It's been alive for 2,500 years, growing to a size that is, you know, 10-story building. It's alive. Thousands of species living on or around it, and you can feel it. And that feeling is really humbling. So I think you can obviously translate that to a storyboard, but starting from an emotional place where, what is the first feeling I had, and is this the feeling that I want, you know, audience to feel when we create this piece? And often kind of trying to reconstruct some of those moments that are really moving for us, just being there, feeling certain things. Like thunder felt in front of sequoias differently, because they act like an antenna. The vibrations of that air moves the whole thing, so the ground shakes. So you feel thunder from the ground, not from the sky in front of a sequoia. So there's this like strange shift in the sensory perception when you are in the presence of these species. So building a story that is multisensory, looking at some of these moments are quite essential. And also multisensory storytelling makes it a bit more accessible, a bit more diverse in its manifestation, but furthermore, the default network we have in our cognition that creates memories uses exactly the same network when we are imagining things far into the future. But one theory that what makes something memory, not a hallucination, is the sensory input that is beyond audiovisual. So the taste in your mouth, the temperature on your forehead, the humidity on your skin, the spatiality of sound, and these are the things that make something memory real, tangible. Even though we reproject and replay these things again and again, they make the memory more memorable. And the Institute of Scent published this study, but in a nutshell, people who are smelling a scent for the first time can recognize it after a year passed, as opposed to a quarter of it for the visuals. So we are bombarded by audiovisual cues all day long, whereas the sensorial moments, and that's why meditation helps. That's why in yoga you come back to your body. That's why, mindfulness bring your attention back to your body, to your senses, beyond just your vision and your auditory world around you. So just building upon these cues and modes, and there's magnificent research in cross-modal kind of perception, how you reconstruct things and how you kind of use these as a tool to tell the story or amplify the story in certain moments. So the piece that you mentioned is actually evolution of TreeHugger. It's called We Live in an Ocean of Air, where we've got 12 audience members, the kind of the the explorers, embark on a journey, putting these backpack PCs on so they are fully mobile and they can walk around. And we've got these custom sensors to sense your kind of out breath. We've got a heartbeat monitor looking at your heartbeat to construct a cardiovascular system as your avatar. So everyone occupies this space as cardiovascular systems with slightly different beats. And that is also another sense. I mentioned in the beginning that we've got more than 5 senses, and one of them is heartbeat. So we subconsciously know our heartbeat, what that is. And if we see something is pulsing in sync with our heartbeat, we are emotionally more drawn to that. This fascinating study we found during the production of the piece. So it's your own avatar, even though it looks strange. You're looking at this slightly uncanny and maybe grotesque manifestation of cardiovascular system, and yet people are finding it, the expression of it very individualized, and also they can recognize each other, even though this world there is no other cue to recognize each other other than the cardiovascular system. So they occupy and go through this experience together, 12 of them. And then, as you mentioned, when you start taking off, a single drop of water takes around 20 minutes to arrive at the canopy for a sequoia tree, and they take around 700 to 800 liters a day. So you're following this journey of water to witness transpiration with 11 other people. And normally climbing the big trees, I think his name will come back to me. I read his book a number of times. Richard. I need to look it up. So in his book, he climbs sequoias, and he describes the change of smell and temperature over time. That's a great cue. Can we create this feeling of change of smell and temperature throughout that journey, because you are standing 100 meters. So we built these wind machines, different scent units, and designed number of different scents to evoke these sensations of, leaving a more neural network memories in your mind as you climb up. And when you come off the piece, you know, it doesn't really matter what happens inside of the gallery. What matters is when you go to a park, when you look at your house plant, when you look at a tree, can you imagine these phases of temperature change if you were to fly up? Can you see the inner systems when you look inside? Can you notice the differences in the breeze and the smell that changes with it? So I think it's more about kind of constructing these cues, the way that we normally live our lives, and turning into tools for the story.
What is a piece of like technology or something that you would want to invent, or that you would want to exist, that like maybe you've been in a situation or there's something you really want to convey and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many limitations to the technology, or there's so many, this can't quite translate, but I know if I could bring this into the piece, it would be, I'm sure you've had those moments where you're like, oh gosh, if only I had. So what's like the thing that you would invent or create that you feel is like currently missing to do some of this work?
It's interesting because whatever I say, there is a negative connotation in the futuristic view of some of those technologies. But I love the idea of brain casting, so being able to record your own, perception of a story, and then braincast to someone else with the flavor that you want to. It's like levers.
Wow.
I mean, this is a very analog braincasting, right? We go to these places, we spend time in these places, and try to understand the nuances and the peaks of the experience, then deconstruct them into story beats as multisensory notes, and then reconstruct them, put together into an experience. So, I mean, obviously, I love that journey process, failures, and the head scratching, and as much like I'd love to say that most of my time in nature, but actually it's in a dark room in front of computers. So I really cherish those moments. So I could probably automate some of these recording and braincasting parts and spend more time in nature, maybe just trying to find the ultimate experience, me as a person, and then braincast that. This is a very speculative thing. I'm quite happy where things are at right
You're
now.
quite happy with the technology. Okay, that's good. How do you think, like knowing what you know now about the ways that this has changed, not only you, but the thousands of people who have come into contact with your work, right? And you have incredible stories of impact and anecdotes of, people weeping and families and just how deeply moved people are because it's because of the way that our senses work. What I experience and what I do understand about virtual reality is your body does kind of feel like it was there and it did it. You know what I mean? So how would you change education, and the way that we speak to people about the natural world, or educate them around nature based on based on what you're seeing and what you're creating?
The idea of this notion of kinesthetic learning is very understudied, yet even the few studies that are done showing an extreme kind of positive outlook into how education can be translated to something more profound, more sensory, less up there, but it's more distributed into our body. Because when knowledge is fully gained, it becomes bodily. It's never that intellectual part and part of your neural pathways reformed and that's it. No, it's just like most of the knowledge, once it's fully internalized, it becomes bodily. So it would be quite an interesting aspect to learn these concepts, because I learned photosynthesis when I was like first 8, maybe 9. The whole concept of trees make oxygen and we inhale that, and that's how we are alive. And then every year you get a bit more detail on the same concept. Never had a concept of being inside of a leaf, seeing the photosynthesis happening in this huge dome of stomata opening above my head. If I had that, it would be. And when we took the predecessor of Oceanographer, TreeHugger, to universities, some of the researchers who's been studying, the well-being of sequoias and the sequoia ecosystems through a number of sensors in California. I mean, it was just fascinating to see. It was like, I've been telling the stories of these trees for 30 years. Now I can take my students to a field trip in headset all together on top of a branch. And obviously you can see the potential. And another small study that we did, I don't think it's convincing enough, like large enough group to make a convincing statement, but there's definitely something promising here. Where in Exmouth School of Arts, we've taken TreeHugger as a piece. Students are given like three groups, I think, age between 9 to 16 or 10 to 16, um, given pieces of text about trees, how they function, what they do, how they live. And one group went into experiencing the tree hugger, seeing the trees in her systems. Another group went on watching a documentary about trees, and another group went on doing nothing about this. The group that saw virtual reality obviously had remembered far more of the information that was given before. The missing part of the puzzle, which was the hypothesis of the researcher, the embodied learning would like we retain embodied learning far longer and far into the future than the information retained through reading or studying in a traditional way. And that's one part of the puzzle that is missing, I think, if with an extensive study being able to prove all of those points. And there is tremendous amount of research out there, but education is such a large field that is so many stakeholders, and it's nationalizing everywhere. There are so many other agendas going in parallel when it comes to educating generations. These are still very unorthodox, but for concepts like this, for classes like science, I think it's a fascinating starting point where you can experience some of those concepts, so you can see what is it like to be witness a black hole merger, like literally witnessing on the edge of that part. These concepts that we've got this insane ability to imagine something like the black holes. 1915, Einstein came with the theory. It took 100 years until 2015 that we finally spent billions and billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of human hours to study, fixated on one and that point throughout, and finally prove it. And this dedication is so fascinating, but can you disseminate, can you kind of expand this to every single individual who are going through these classrooms, just feeling the magic of life and being alive, and expanding your sense of what the universe is about, how I am related to it, and how life is so miraculous to exist on this planet from an experiential point of view. I think we would be looking at a different future. So I see this huge potential.
That's so beautifully said. You spoke about kinesthetic learning and embodied learning. And one of the questions I was going to ask you was sort of, what do you wish that everyone knew about the world based on what you've seen and experienced? And I actually think that the best version of that question is, what do you wish that everybody in the world could feel? Which is so entirely different. And you've kind of hinted at it a little bit. I think something that we also connect on is our acknowledgement of the ecological predicaments that we're in, and the social predicaments, and a sincere commitment to do what we can in our own ways at this time. And so what are the sort of messages that you hope to send, and probably are sending through your work, in terms of a felt or an intellectual experience about the living world? Obviously, you have awe, we have wonder, we've touched on those. But I'm curious if you can maybe elaborate on some of the more subtle messages or the ones you have coming up possibly as
Sure.
well.
I think two things immediately. One is something I repeat and repeat as a mantra to myself, because even though you study, you create work, you read about this, you forget that whenever you feel, or when I feel a bit lonely, lost, bored, this idea of every breath, every third breath I take coming from a tree, that I am in a very intimate relationship with a tree in that very moment. And the other two, from these tiny critters live in the ocean. So I've got this expansive relationship in every breath I take. And it's not easy to remember, actually, even though it is so fundamental to life. So I wish we had more moments to remind us
Mm-hmm.
this, that, again, the whole notion of expanding your sense of self to include the entire living world. And, knowing that you are part of a living, breathing organism, not apart from, and your skin doesn't separate you from, that is quite liberating, actually. The second one is evolution of life beyond our bodies. And that's a notion that I am now looking into more. When the life in this body ends, with its form, with it, with this form, and translates to something else, that is often very scary for us. But also, I'm finding it more and more magical, that there is something beyond, in the idea of, thousands of different species spawned from your own body, and those, becoming mycelial structures and flowering from the forest floor as a mushroom, while a part of you becoming part of the oak tree down the forest, is quite an interesting notion. And the new piece that we are now creating is mainly looking at that notion. The life in soil is so rich and diverse and magical, and yet people like myself who grew up in an urban setting, soil is dirt and death. How can I change my own perception of soil through learning this process and turn this into an experiential piece that we celebrate what happens there, and not just because it decomposes and changes the content of life through, myriad of relationships, but also it provides all the nutrients that we need to survive, including sequestrating carbon from the atmosphere and producing oxygen by helping plants and trees to exist. So this magical place is almost like Mariana Trench waiting to be explored. It's the coral reefs, never been seen before. So I'm really excited, and I hope not just through this project, but us as species have a bit more appreciation and kind of desire to understand that part.
Yeah, you've often spoken about like, what your work is about, making the invisible visible, both very tangibly, but also these processes that are us that we just don't see because we don't have that kind of vision. We don't see time in that scale, or we are busy with our emails. And I think, even just returning to the humble breath. I remember when I did that experience, the piece Evolver, which is sort of entering my own body. I felt my body as like a sovereign being that was like, it had its own purpose and processes, and it was just like, oh, this is me, but it's not. So like this very destabilizing notion of the self, I thought was really profound. Just a few questions, because I know that we're reaching the end of our time. I'm so curious, like where you go for ideas, like what's on your bookshelf, what are you reading, like how do you inspire yourself by these ideas that do you read like alchemy over here and like something, I don't know, like how do you get inspired?
It's often nonfiction kind of research books that inspires me a lot. And um, late Karen Becker's book, The Sounds of Life, for instance, that I read it a year and a half, 2 years ago. Was lucky enough to meet her, and looking at her body of work, her research, and understanding the life in the oceans and our notions and how they change and how ignorant we were for a very, very long time. And life thrives in the suboceanic way in a completely different way. And some species experience life in ways that is really difficult to fathom. So that's like a beautiful inspiration. And so ever since I read this book, we've obviously got this body of work around Umwelt, looking at the sensory perception of different species. We've been just like in the back of my mind, let's look at the whales. We need to think of the idea of, a sperm whale can talk to each other from 2,000 kilometers apart. They found these different salination channels that spans across this big telephone line between two species, sending these clicky, rich, diverse, strange messages. A humpback whale, their hums and whales, they start singing different songs when they migrate to the breeding grounds. And then one song gets picked. They have this amazing chart of favorites. They all start singing that particular song going back. So things like this, and written in a way, all with the spotlight of research, but a sparkle of poetry and the magic and appreciation of life, and then just like it encourages it, just it boosts mine and our imagination to create something with it. And Tom Mustill wrote a book about how to speak whale. So, finding a thread like this that just viscerally provokes your imagination, that turns into a piece. Same goes for, the mushroom, this whole idea of mycelial structures, the project that we are starting, talking to Marilyn Sheldrake, reading his book, and then obviously Susan Smart's studies, like early on, that's coming, almost like for decades they've been kind of advocating this world that was tucked and hidden from the human perception. So these books are profoundly influencing what we do, how we do it, where we draw inspiration. Um, and then now more and more kind of trying to find inspiration in the experience by being in these places. But it's often provoked by a book like that.
I love all the people you just mentioned. Karen also came on the podcast, and yeah, you should listen to that episode. I think you'd really enjoy it.
Amazing.
She's such an inspiration.
She was the best. She's such it's incredible. Yes.
And just the little coral larvae that can like navigate back to the sound of their home reef, and just, oh my gosh, it's epic. So one last question, and I'm sure that maybe you've definitely thought about this and probably heard it in other occasions, but I'm curious what's true for you today. Umwelt, life worlds. Who would you want to be right now? Like, which experience would you want to go into and embody? Species or ecosystems, or like based on what you've been reading and seeing and learning? If I could just metamorphose you for a bounded period of time, or maybe forever, what would you like to become, or who would you like to become?
I've got three. Can I pick three? Because I
Yes.
wanna pick from three different kingdoms. So one of them is lesser nosed bats. They are these tiny bats that can fly 50 kilometers a night, and they have this very special relationship with jade vines. So they are buzzing, sending their echolocation, and the jade vine changes its shape when there is nectar in it, so they can hear the sound of food.
Mm.
But sometimes jade wine uses to deceive, sometimes just want to attract them regardless, so they can put the last bit of pollen. Normally the bat wouldn't come in for that much. They change their shape to pretend that they have. So they've got this really playful relationship I'd love to experience through the sensory perception of lesser nosed bats, and like seeing the world through echolocation probably would be quite interesting. The other one that I'm really struggling to fully find visual sensory metaphors, even for myself to understand. And this, I'd love to be for a moment to embody the sensory perception of a ceiba pentandra tree. It's one of the trees that I've spent most time with in the Colombian Amazon, and we've done a series of projects about. So, I've studied the taxonomic understanding of what we know about these species, and a fair bit of time there just being in the presence of some of the majestic ones that we could reach, and still not fully. I mean, obviously, I'm probably never going to fully comprehend what is it like to be a tree for sure. But this idea of stillness in a world of constant change, as fast as the tropics. What does it mean to be that species? There is the chemical relationship between kingdoms. Sometimes it's symbiotic, but sometimes it's parasitic. And these insects, everything is half eaten. They're trying to constantly, win over one species after another. And what is it like to be present? Static. Static is not the right word. I think present in that space. How do you perceive time? If you can be alive for that long, and what is it like to be having hundreds of different species relying on you that is visibly beneficial and you have relationships with, but also what is it like to see the world through your leaves? Like if you were to have eyeballs on your every hair in your body, like on the tip of your hairs. Imagine having loads of eyeballs. What would it look like? How do I construct a visual sense of myself and the things around me? And they spend they love a holiday, so they spend half the year underwater. So what would it be? And so you've got this like very diverse set of relationships when you're a sable pentandra tree. So I'd love to be that. And finally, the third one is this is I'm going to go lazy because obviously experiencing life as a mushroom, or the mycelial structure would have been amazing. This notion of growing, like you're not going anywhere, you're growing to places, and just it's interesting to think that the notion of movement and mobility changes completely, but then the in a single spoonful of soil, there is somewhere between 10 meters to 100 kilometers, 10 kilometers mycelial structures. And oftentimes, well, pretty much all the time, these are like loads of different species enmeshed into forming a single network. So what is the sense of individuality, if there is any? How do you expand this sense of self and yet still understand who is who? Because they still need to know who they are, and yet fully enmesh with other beings. And this notion I can't fathom, so it would be great to have it for a 5 minutes and then come back. It's like, oh, I see. I don't know. I mean, obviously, this is a big dream. Like, we're never gonna fully understand. But I just one can dream.
May the great gods of reincarnation hear your wish, hear your 3 wishes,
Oh, yeah,
and may
definitely.
they be granted. I have a genie bottle. One of the things that struck me in your answer is like, even with the bats, like they're sort of hive creatures, right? Like they have colonies, and the trees are obviously not individuals themselves, and obviously the fungi aren't as well. And so in all of these, it's like, what is it like to be this individual, but also to have a mind that is also all the other species that it's interacting with. I think that is where we get into super fascinating territory of like, actually, there's probably such a thing more than what it's like to be an individual tree. There's something about what it's like to be a forest. And I think maybe that's in the beginning what you captured even with your 2015 piece, which is like, to be the forest is this cycle, more than anything else. So I loved your answers. I'm going to be thinking about who I'd like to be. But Urson,
What is yours?
oh gosh, I don't know. Um, mm, 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 mm. I want to be really. Oh gosh, I don't know. I need to get back to you on that. I really think I want to be able to fly. It's like so basic. It's so
Oh,
basic. But truly,
that's
I
great.
want to be able to know what it's like to feel and sense the magnetic energies of the earth and be guided by magnetism, and then have like feathers that know how to read the wind, and just via wind and magnets like be moved to different places, and then like belong to like like the murmurations, like belong to like other friends of mine that are like moving with me, and like that must be, and you like see the storm coming and you're like, okay, I don't know,
Yeah,
that must be really cool. So some flying creature, but I have to think about which one.
love it.
um
That's wonderful.
yeah, yeah, that would be really cool.
I'll meet you. I'll meet you by the tree.
Exactly. I'll come make a nest. Urson, thank you so much for your time. As usual, I'm going to make very extensive show notes where people can really read, click, learn, participate, all of those kinds of things. And in the meantime, I can't say how grateful I am that you and your collaborative and your colleagues exist in the world and are like so deeply humble and caring and bringing this message to people. It fills me with joy. So I'm very grateful. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you, Alex. So I am really grateful for this wonderful conversation, allowing me to talk about my passion and the practice. So this was one joy of an hour.